friends at Stevivor.com. It's me, Mario. Hee you guys number one.
It's Stevivor's Friendly Fire Show, episode 228 for the midpoint of February 2023. I'm one of your co-hosts, Steve Wright. Joining me, Ben Salter. Hi, Ben.
We're back.
We're back
How you
again.
going, Steve?
Good. This isn't anything new now. We're, 2 or 3 episodes into the new year at this point? So you can't keep falling back. Yeah.
No, you can't. Well, what are we up to? Episode 228. So we can't pretend like we don't know what we're doing. It's been a long time, so we know what we're doing. You've set up your Google Nest, whatever fancy thing. So yeah, that's what's been happening.
Yeah, and I think I do need to apologize because despite us knowing what we're doing, I don't. I think my audio was just trash fire last week, so I think I've fixed it. But feel free to continue to tell me in messages that I sound like garbage, or maybe I sound fine and people are just telling me that I just talk a lot of garbage, which is also a possibility.
Both true, but you sound fine to me, so I don't know. Fix it in post, that's what I always say. Last week's episode was kind of a catch-up of stuff. The next couple of weeks, busy, including this episode, because games are happening, things are happening. We did say last week that we're going to be talking about Hogwarts Legacy this week. We're not going to do that because Nintendo came out and said, we're going to release a bunch of stuff right now. They did the Shadow Drop, not the game that we thought they were going to Shadow Drop, but a bunch of other stuff. And the big one that I've been waiting for. There was one game that I wanted more than GoldenEye, which we did eventually get, of course. Metroid Prime Remastered. It's finally here. I feel like this game's been rumored for 3-4 years. They've been talking about it for ages.
Almost as long as we've been expecting Metroid Prime 4, I would say. So at least you got one of them.
I don't know where that is. So I played a fair bit. I don't think you've played it. It's Metroid Prime, I would say, is probably my favorite game of all time. It's certainly top 3. It's great. It's my favorite of the trilogy. There's nothing else like this, really. They kind of came out in the early 2000s. They turned a 2D series into a great 3D game, and then they released 3 of them, and they kind of just stopped. And no one's really copied this formula. I kind of see threads of it in Control, but it's quite different. That's obviously a third-person game. It really took that 2D Metroidvania style of you need to kind of explore, and it's quite linear pathways through this world in different kind of areas. Unlock new abilities and then kind of remember where to go and backtrack. A lot of games have done that, but even more recent ones like Hollow Knight that have followed that have gone back to 2D. So we haven't really had this style, and it holds up amazingly well. It's good. And it's a proper remaster. So Nintendo don't really do remasters. They normally do, here's the same old game that you've bought 4 times already, and it's the same thing. We've maybe up-resed it, as we saw with the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection, and it's still pretty good, so go ahead and play it. That's normally what they do. They've done the 3 Zelda games, which they've just called HD.
Yeah.
And they've had they're again up-resed, maybe a higher frame rate, can't even remember, slightly different controls. The old texture change, not a huge improvement, but they still kind of hold up pretty well.
And either here are wiggle controls or here are not wiggle controls, depending on the game and what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of Skyward Sword, they took out the wiggle controls, so great. And yeah, that's a good point for this one. So Metroid Prime obviously released on GameCube. It was released back in the era of a single stick shooter. And we should say, if you haven't played Prime, it looks like, if you just watch someone play this, it will look like a shooter. Because, you've got an arm cannon, basically. That's Samus's main thing. It's not really a shooter. You're shooting a bunch of stuff. You spend a lot of time shooting, but it's more of a puzzle exploration game. You spend a lot of, there's first-person 3D platforming in this, which rare. Very few games have that. And you need to figure out how to get through places. You need to kind of determine if you can get somewhere with what you currently have available, or if that's a future unlock. And you kind of quickly, the more you play, you figure that type of stuff out. But that's pretty rare. And so, yeah, obviously that single stick style just breaks your brain, as we had with GoldenEye recently. So they've added in proper dual stick controls. That's the default. Works really well. Until now, the only way to kind of play like that was the Wii version of this, which came out in 2009. And it was kind of a dual stick system. But the second stick was the Wiimote. So pointer controls. That is still here if you want to play like that. It's not as good as the Wii, because obviously the Wii had the light bar thing and a direct pointer, not motion gyro. I wouldn't play like that. That's insane. It plays properly to your brain for the first time ever. And beyond that, it looks really good. Like, so it looks, the best thing I could say about it is it looks how your brain remembers it. So I always remember Metroid Prime looking amazing. I played for like 20 minutes when I was a kid, just kind of jumping in and out of the water and watching the water drip down Samus's visor in first person, which I hadn't really seen before at that time. I was like, wow, so realistic. If you want to play that now, it's probably like some blue splodges just on the screen on your CRT in SD. But they've like recaptured it, totally redone stuff like that. It's all still here as you remember it, but better, if that makes sense. It's how you actually remember it, is what it actually looks like now. If you look at any comparison, probably doesn't do it justice looking at a compressed video, but you see what the GameCube version of all these levels actually look like, and they've kind of remade them how they should have looked, and it's like full-on texture remake. So they've called it Metroid Prime Remastered. I don't want to get bogged down in the what to remake, what to remaster debate. I feel like we have that every week on this show. This is a remaster, though. It's the underlying game is the same thing. It's what you played on GameCube. Great game. The visuals totally redone, like the whole world, and that's what surprises me. It's not just a couple of characters have been updated; it's everything. All the environments look new. Probably the best looking game on Switch. Certainly the best looking game I played on the OLED screen, playing in handheld mode. But even on TV, like it looks like maybe not as like a Series X PS5 current gen game, but it's certainly like a PS4 level current gen game, which is I don't think I've really seen that on Switch. And coming off like Pokemon, which performs so poorly, it runs a locked 60 frames. And I don't think it's 1080p the whole time. Maybe it's dynamic res, like 900 to 1080. I'm not entirely sure. We'll let Digital Foundry figure that out for us, but it looks good. So that's the main thing. So it's not just a HD texture pack. It's fully remade. I think Retro Studios did this themselves, maybe with the help of another studio, which is also rare. They've done like a Blue Point Games level remaster. And so it's up there with like your Demon Souls. It's that level of quality. Your Last of Us Part 1, your Dead Space. I think it's in that group of quality remasters.
Yeah. Well, and like you've said so many things that are like, I want to like jump in. This is the Ben show when we're talking about Metroid Prime. Sorry, I know nothing about Metroid Prime, but like we've talked about The Last of Us, which, 3 versions in the last 10 years on platforms that you can readily have in your hand. In terms of backwards compatibility, not in terms of like going out and having to find a PS3. Same thing with Dead Space. That's 2008 to 2023. So there's more. I can't do math in my head, but like it looks the same in my head until you look at it side by side and it doesn't. But like, do you want to spend the 110 for this one, or do you want to spend the 15 on backwards compatibility for the first one? This is a little bit more difficult because it's an old GameCube game. I think it came out on the Wii in Japan.
No, it came out on the Wii. In a trilogy, which was only released on disc for like 2 months or like 4 months or something. So it was one of those things. It was kind of like the All Stars collection, but actually rare. So it was all 3 games with motion controls added to the first 2, and it skyrocketed to be like $300 like in 2009, like the year after it came out. Not until they released it on the Wii U eShop for like $20 was it actually accessible. So, and you can't get that as of next month. So they've made it accessible again.
And this isn't $110 game anyway. What did it set you back? I can't remember.
$60. So it's half the price of all those games we've just discussed. I've seen some people complain, mainly Americans, saying American US 40, like outrageous, how dare they? But it's like a full-on proper remaster. It's not just a up-res skin. And so if they're saying that because originally it was rumored to be the full trilogy, and that's probably the only thing. It would be great to get the other 2 games, and I think we probably will. At least Metroid Prime 2 if this sells. 3 is kind of a different kettle of fish because it was made for motion pointing, so it would take maybe a bit more work to get that up to a normal control scheme. 2 is probably the one less people have played anyway, so hopefully that does come. But like, we didn't complain about Dead Space 1 on its own. Like, they didn't do a Dead Space 1, 2, 3 trilogy remaster. They've done it. They're doing it game by game. So I don't see why you'd think it's any different. Maybe because the Mass Effect trilogy came as one package. But that had less work done than this. Like, and those games were newer and they held up a bit more. That's more like the remaster we were just talking about, which is a few sectors here and there and up-resed and runs a bit better. Still good. I'm happy with that level remaster. But this is that full-on Demon Souls level. It's almost like the Tony Hawk games as well. Like, something is almost that era, like quite old and just fully remade. So I think $60 is very reasonable. And I'm surprised because Nintendo, they can charge what they want.
Well, exactly. And like, are they charging more for the Zelda game? That's what, if you were seeing me on the video looking down, that was me trying to like frantically like go on my phone. Because I know there was news about, like Zelda games going to the, what would it, I guess, be $110 mark in Australia, if true, like the 70 US. Did that pan out in the end? I can't remember.
So it's $90. So most Switch games are $80. So we're talking recommended retail, not what you can actually pay on cart. Let's just talk every game if you're buying it digital from the store. So it's $90 in Australia. That's what Breath of the Wild was as well. So for some reason, Nintendo said their two Zelda games cost $10 more than everything else. That's just how it's been all generation. Turns out, I thought everyone got this deal. So I assume Switch games were like maybe $50 in the US, but they've been $60 the whole time. So for some reason, we've been getting Switch games at $80 instead of the usual 100 or now 110. I think that will happen next generation.
It should happen next generation. I understand that development is increasing in cost and the amount of time it takes to make something is probably getting a little bit higher. But the Switch is 6 years old. Don't bump up prices now. Wait till you announce the Switch Pro or whatever the heck is coming out. Sorry, I cut you off. That is true. But yeah.
But as I say, Breath of the Wild was $90 6 years ago. So they've kind of just matched that for the sequels, at least in Australia. America, I don't know why. We just seem to have a more expensive Zelda game here. I think because it was on Wii U as well, and Wii U games were 100. So they kind of went, well, Switch games are 80, Wii U games were 100. Let's just put Zelda, which is on both, in the middle. And they've just matched that for the sequel. Yeah, whatever. Like, people complain a lot. I suppose if they're going to rip into Nintendo for $70 for a Zelda game at the end of the life of the console, $40 US for a remaster of a great game, and Nintendo's first actual proper remaster should be applauded. But of course, that's not what people on Twitter and NeoGAF and those type of places are like. So they just want to complain about everything. If you haven't played Metroid Prime, I would definitely play it. By far the best version. Now it's accessible. You can buy it today digitally. You can buy it in about a month physical. And that's the big thing, like Shadow Drop.
I don't think I've said the word Shadow Drop ever, really, before the last couple of weeks. And between you and I, just even on in this format, we've said Shadow Drop 7 million times. It's so exciting and weird. What's going on? Is this going to be a normal thing? Is this a common thing now? Are you getting one of these every week? Have Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft huddled up to make us all super excited with all these not intentionally, but for the sake of this joke, are they lining all these up for us? So we're just having a really good 2023.
It's great. You don't have that time to overthink these things. And also the fact that both Nintendo and Xbox both did their showcase for the start of the year. And they're pretty clear that this is first, up until July max release dates. And so they both released the game same day as the showcase. It makes sense when some people kind of we knew about most of the other games in the Directs. We knew about Pikmin 4, but it finally got a date. We knew about Advance Wars, which has been out for 8. Well, obviously some underlying things behind that, but we've known about it for a while. That's coming out pretty soon now. And there weren't that many surprises until Prime, of course. But they're pretty clear about that, as was Xbox, as I'm sure Sony will be in their next state of play. And I wonder if they'll delay to try to see, hang on, can we Shadow Drop anything? Because Hi-Fi Rush has reviewed really well and it's top charts. I'm sure Metroid Prime probably is not a fact-based show at the top of the eShop by now. It's an effective way to do these things, especially for these smaller games. And Nintendo's shown they're willing to do it with a retail game as well. They've said, digital's out today, retail will follow in about a month, which kind of changes things. That means anything could Shadow Drop.
Yeah. Well, so we've seen one from Nintendo, we've seen one from Microsoft. What do you think? Not that Sony has to do this, but what do you think Sony could Shadow Drop?
Oh, the thing is that the two that we got, we didn't really have any visibility that they were coming. It wasn't like it was a game that we knew about, which they were is out today. Hi-Fi Rush got announced and it was released. Metroid Prime was rumored for so long, but almost to the point that we kind of assume that's just those insiders, and there are so many dodgy Nintendo insiders who just make shit up. We kind of just put it down. It seemed like it was legit, and it made sense, but that's normally when you assume that's not going to happen because Nintendo.
Yeah.
So that wasn't leaked at all. So I think it would be something we would have no idea about. And I wonder if Sony until now has been the king of the remasters. They use Bluepoint amazingly well. Would they go here's a Bloodborne remastered and it's out today type of situation? That's
what everyone wants. So maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, and it's something that would be an easy one in that it's something which is already available. Here's a better version of it. Of course, they'd probably charge $125 rather than $60. So different situation. If they did a Nintendo and they released it as a budget game, that would be amazing. That would seal the deal.
Yeah. So I put you on the spot, so sorry about that for one. Two, your answer is correct. It's probably not going to be something that we know is in the works. So it could be and I don't know, there's been reports that Sony's had to drop its forecast for VR2 sales because one, it's $1,000 here, and two, there's a recession or a fake recession or whatever the heck is happening economy wise. So, maybe people aren't willing to drop so much money, but like that would be a good shadow drop opportunity. Like here's not a VR game that's sitting on a PC platform that you can already get, but on PSVR 2. Like here's a exclusive VR game that you didn't know was coming, and hopefully this sweetens the pot so you want to get VR 2. Maybe, and I'm reaching here, like that Last of Us Factions just kind of gets like it's ready, have fun, which would play into all the Last of Us stuff that Sony is doing, which ties into the HBO show, of course, which would be great and would be picked up like hotcakes. That doesn't even make sense, but you get what I mean. So those are options, or something completely I would like to see something more in the vein of I'd like a remaster Nintendo style, but I'd like to see something more in the vein of we let a studio do something like completely left of field from what they're known for doing, and here's the end result. Like it wasn't just like a little internal project for fun. Like it was made, it's awesome, and here you go. Now you can play it. That'd be cool. Ideally on PlayStation Plus, but that's not going to happen.
More like a Hi-Fi Rush, which essentially was that.
Yeah, exactly that.
But they might though, if they pretty much said we're not going to release our first party big AAA games on PlayStation Plus. But if they did a Hi-Fi Rush digital only style game, maybe they would. I don't think they've entirely ruled out smaller games launching on there.
Yeah, the reason that they didn't, that's like the justification, wasn't it? Like you're not getting God of War Ragnarok because this is a premium title. We've put way too much money into it to justify a subscription release. But that is an absolute valid stance to take. But if you're not putting that much kind of investment into something from a small subset of a studio or something, then you're still being true to your word, but also being able to do something different.
Yeah, and I suppose so. We've had one game which is in Game Pass or was like $40, and we've had another game which is a remaster at $60, so pretty reasonably priced. I don't think you can shadow drop a $125 game. Like it's just that needs the bigger marketing push behind it. We're not going to ever get that level. The same reason I don't think Nintendo would come out with actually Breath of the Wild or whatever it's called, Tears of the Kingdom is out today. Like, no one's going to do it on a risky, like something that's too important. It's going to be on a smaller scale, something old, something a little bit left of field, which is also cool because that's how those games get more of a spotlight. I mean, I've now shelved, like I have such a backlog and I have so many games that I'm nearly finished or partway through. And I've kind of just stopped everything to play Prime because it's like I've been waiting for so long. It's so good. And everything else, you know what? You're going to have to wait. I'm halfway through GoldenEye and bloody 00 Agent to get the achievements. And man, that's tough. The Switch version has the emulator has the rewind so you can cheat. Oh, yeah. The Xbox doesn't have that. So, but anyway, I've had to shelve that because something better's come along. So I'm looking forward to what's next.
Yeah, spoiled for choice. I don't feel bad for you, Ben. And on that vein, because this has been pretty much the Ben show, and you're going to lead the conversation when we get back to Nintendo, I'm gonna intercut for a bit and talk about Star Trek Picard. Yeah, so
let's do it.
Or people will just skip past this and go straight back to the Nintendo news. Please don't, especially if you're a Star Trek fan. I basically harassed CBS to get screeners for Star Trek Picard Season 3. Not really. I was meant to get them and something didn't work. And they were all like, why are you talking to us? You should already be watching them. And I'm like, but I don't have them. And I was having if I got them when I was in Adelaide with you, Ben, I'm telling you now, you would have had to watch Star Trek Picard with me. There would not have been a discussion. It would have just had to have happened like that. Luckily, it didn't for you. Unluckily for me, I had to wait a little bit longer than other people, but I absolutely got to watch 6 episodes of a 10 episode arc way ahead of time. It comes out on the 17th here in Australia, that being episode 1, now on Paramount Plus and Amazon Prime Video. So if you have one or the other subscription, you are in a much better place than you could have been a week ago, depending on what's sitting in your library. It is a Star Trek The Next Generation sequel with the full cast instead of being its own weird, like, dystopian future sort of connected to Picard, not really connected to Star Trek. It's Star Trek for once. They finally, after 2 seasons of kind of garbage TV, decided that, all the stuff that the fans have been asking for and wanting, like a Star Trek show that takes place on a Starfleet ship in space and not in the past in LA on the ground. Like, everything that you want is absolutely happening. It's a really huge hit of nostalgia, but not in like a like a Rise of Skywalker kind of way where it doesn't really fit. Like everything is for a purpose and a reason, and invokes something from the past, but also is like progressing the plot forward. It's just a really nice warm blanket that if you're a Star Trek fan, you can wrap yourself up in, and just like I melted. It's like I had really high highs. I was crying most of the time. It was quite probably distressing for my husband, who was like enjoying it, but like looking at me on the couch, kind of like side eye, being like, "Are you okay? Do we need to pause this? Is something wrong?" It's just really, really good, and I'm trying to talk about it without saying anything about the plot, because just get into it yourself. I doubt you have any questions. I know you were taking a drink, so that was why you muted your mic, but like literally you just muted your mic because like I'm done here for a bit.
No, that was I don't have anything to add. Just it sounds like you've had the same reaction to Picard that I had to Metroid Prime release. So we've had good times with Blast from the Past, basically, over the last few days. So
yeah,
essentially we just want to be back doing the things we loved like 20 years ago. Forget this new stuff.
Well, without spoiling a lot of stuff, there's been a lot of marketing saying, like they're kind of like prepping for the next generation, and they absolutely are. There's all this. I don't know how much Star Trek news you know. I know the answer to that question. You know nothing. Not in a bad way. But Michelle Yeoh was on Discovery. She's Michelle Yeoh. She's potentially going to win an Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once. Is that right? Yes. She's an amazingly talented actor. She did great work on Discovery, but like her character was garbage. And they're like, oh, well, we're going to bring her back for this like Section 31 show, which is like the evil spy faction of like Starfleet. So it's not like hopeful, optimistic, utopian, like what Star Trek is. It's like secret agent, covert ops. Like, I don't want any of that. So if Terry Matalas, who did 12 Monkeys and has done Picard, if he gets his way, he's going to make some sort of like Star Trek kind of like taking place after what Picard is setting out, with like legacy characters so they could explore Deep Space Nine or Voyager or the Next Generation with some of the characters that have been created for Picard, or like using the just huge pool of characters who are still kind of around in the world. Like, do that instead. Don't do weird subvert covert ops garbage. Do like Star Trek on a ship in space, being fun. Thank you. End of rant.
I think the people have got it.
Let's get back to video games.
Back to talking about things that we love from the past. Nintendo's other shadow drop was a bunch of Game Boy games announced on Switch as well, which is probably not that surprising, in that kind of once a year they add something to their Switch Online kind of virtual console replacement. And Game Boy was the obvious next one. I thought they were going to do, when they showed that like old school 90s gray brick thing, I thought it was going to be Game Boy only, like original Game Boy, not even including Game Boy Color, even though they're the same platform-ish. But then they didn't actually say Game Boy Color. They just kind of showed like a few, like Wario Land 3 was a Game Boy Color only game, and that's in there. So it's all one thing. That's how Nintendo consider it. That's good. And then they actually surprised me, and they said Game Boy Advance as well, but that's in the Online Plus add-on, whatever the other tier is called. I can't remember.
Expansion pack.
That's it. Some weird Nintendo
like it's
name.
a physical thing that has to plug into your Nintendo Online subscription.
An expansion pack to a subscription, whatever. And I think we'd probably agree that that one, because it doubles the cost, has been a bit lacking in content. Like it's just got like 12 Nintendo 64 games in there and the DLC for Mario Kart, and it's okay.
And
like,
GoldenEye now,
cost.
but also,
and GoldenEye, because you can't buy it. That's the only way to play it, unless you have Rare Replay. So I would buy that digitally, because who knows? Anyway, that's our hot tip. We've had that most episodes. So yes, we've got a bunch of new Game Boy games. It's a decent catalog, but probably not enough. Like there's, I think, 8 or 9 Game Boy Color games, and there's only 6 Game Boy Advance games. So they love a good old drip feed, does Nintendo. And no, I think they'll probably add like 3 Game Boy games a month and maybe 1 GBA game. I'm not sure how familiar you are with these libraries. Like the Game Boy is massive.
Yeah, I had a Game Boy, but like I can't look back and think of like
what you'd play.
I owned an NES. I had access to an SNES at a friend's house, like most after school days. My cousins had an N64 and a GameCube, which I had less access to. But like I can look back on all of those consoles and think of a couple good games that I'd be like, ooh, like I either just really had a good time enjoying that, or like there was like 4 of us and we were playing Mario Kart and that was the best. Like I remember sitting and playing the Batman animated series Game Boy game, like to and from like big hockey road trips out in like rural Saskatchewan, but like I wouldn't ever feel the need to replay that game. And I can't think of any Game Boy games that I'm like, ooh, I simply must have that. Do you have any?
I think so. It's kind of weird. So like Game Boy has, because it was out for like 10 years, right? So there's so many games on it, like thousands. And it was the only platform that was successful for ages. So there's heaps there. Games like Batman that you just mentioned are never going to be released on here because of licensing. So there's a bunch which you just ruled out. And that's probably, you're right, they're probably a bit too dated. Besides like, so Mario Land, whatever, 2, I think, is there. That's a good game. It's like very early 90s, or even, early 90s it would have been. Like full-on black and white style. So we should mention you do have the option, and I would go in and change this. It's in the menu of the Game Boy app. If you want to play with that like original Game Boy like green hue, which is gross.
Oh,
Or you can play in the Game Boy Pocket like actual grayscale black and white, which I think looks nicer if that's how you want to play it. Or you can play with the Game Boy Color filter. So Game Boy Color was kind of like a mid-gen refresh, I suppose, or late-gen refresh. And it did have the ability to add color to all previous games. It just kind of guessed the color palette. And you could actually change that when you played a game. So that's how you could get Mario wearing like pink overalls or whatever. And then there were obviously games which actually for Game Boy Color, which put the proper colors in. So you can choose which you play on. You may as well play color, I think. But yeah, there's not that much I would play from the Game Boy library. I think they'll add way more to that just because it's so vast.
yeah.
GBA, there's quite a lot, and those games hold up quite well in the same way that SNES games hold up. Like it was kind of the last era of 2D gaming, so it was when they were pretty well on top of it, and they're all quality. The problem is the GBA only lasted like 3 years before the DS came around, and if you recall that like Reggie with his like My Body Is Ready, that's where that came from. Like there was somewhere in that E3, and he pulled out like the hideous DS from his pocket, the prototype, and they were very much like, we're not giving up on Game Boy Advance. Like it's going to be a third thing. They were totally giving up on it. It was like they were just unsure. They didn't want to take the risk. And then GBA kind of died pretty quick. So it only had like maybe 4 years on the market. Some of that overlap. So there's not that many new games. So there are 4 like Mario games on Game Boy Advance, and they're all ports. So they're already on Switch Online. Like you can already get Super Mario World. You can already get Yoshi's Island. And they were all on Game Boy Advance. And it was amazing at the time to play that in a handheld. In the same way that it's kind of amazing to play a bunch of games on Switch in handheld mode in 2017. But it's like, do they just release them again? Yeah. Or do they, like, that's the problem. GBA doesn't have that many new games. What it does have there now is Minish Cap. That's a good Zelda game made by Capcom, weirdly. It's probably the only one. I think there's Mario's Superstar Saga if you're into RPGs. That's not my boat, but it's pretty good if you're into that. And that's kind of what GBA did have. It had a bunch of good RPGs. So I think that's where they'll come from. They still look pretty good. They look a lot better on like the OLED Switch screen than on your like 65-inch TV.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Like I've been playing, I think like Persona 4 Golden on Vita was like my first PlayStation trophy ever. I love that game.
Wow.
And I've played Persona 5, which is like the same franchise, obviously, but like moving from a portable handheld to a proper console on a TV game, and you can tell the difference. And then like now that Persona 4 is on Game Pass and stuff, I've been playing it again, and it feels like a portable game on my TV, which is weird. Which is maybe what Pokemon is happening with Pokemon, but like this is exactly that. How do these little portable games that are supposed to be like a teeny little square in front of you with the weird green hue, I should add. That's how you're supposed to play classic Game Boy. Okay. Yeah, that's the one. With the weird, with the stupid light that you had to put on top of it because you couldn't see in the dark, and it really just illuminated the corners of the screen, so you couldn't see anyway. How do they play on a TV?
Well, that's a good point, actually. These games were not meant to be played with a backlight. Like, the kids these days don't understand. You had to, like, angle the light in your room or the sun, I guess, outside to get, like, visibility on the screen. And this was up until even the first GBA didn't have a backlight. It was, like, a late one. The SP added it in. And, like, but if you had too much light, it blinded it. And so you couldn't see anything. Like, these games are meant to be tough.
I had the light, like little, I don't think it was first party. I think it was just like a third party, whatever. I had like the light one, which didn't really work. And then I had one that was supposed to magnify the screen, but you know, didn't really work either. But
yeah, there were a lot of shitty accessories back in the day. But to answer your question, I think they look pretty good on like in handheld mode. On your screen, yeah, they're blown up. It depends how big your TV is, I suppose. But yeah, they do look quite blown up. They're pretty crisp though. But I guess they're quite pixel-based games. There is an option to play with a smaller screen, so that's in the setting, and it kind of shrinks it down a fair bit. I suppose if you were playing in handheld mode, it kind of shrinks it to almost what the screen size was, maybe just a little bit bigger. I don't really think.
I don't know why you do that to yourself, though. Like, why? We're thinking back nostalgically about this horrible experience, but like, why would you want to recreate it if you don't have to?
Yeah, but they're definitely very playable. So the main thing is really, I think there's a few missing. I think that they should have added, and they're obviously saving some of the big hitters. They've got like a Metroid in there, there's a Mario in there, there's a Zelda in there. The main things you'd expect. I am surprised that there's no Pokemon at all, considering that Violet and Scarlet run so poorly and yet still smashing records. People don't care. They just want to play Pokemon. There are so many across the whole Game Boy range. There's like 1 million Pokemon games. They didn't release any mainline ones. Like even if you're going to start with Red Blue, I would have loved it, which they did release on the 3DS. I would have loved it. They just went the remakes, which were GBA games. They're obviously saving them. And the other missing one is Metroid Fusion. Considering that came out same day as Metroid Prime, and that just launched, would have made sense to me to throw that in there as well. I only played that. I think I spoke about it on the podcast like a few months, maybe a year ago after Metroid Dread. Actually got a Game Boy Advance with a modded backlit screen so I could see it. And I played that cart, which I bought in 2002, but I was too much of a noob back then to actually get through it. This time I played it. Great game. They did show it in the sizzle reel, so it will get released, but it's not there yet.
Well, that makes more sense. I don't think any of the Pokemon games are going to come. One, because I don't think they're going to be a huge draw card in terms of getting people to get Nintendo Switch Online. I think it's more still going to be the NES and SNES and like N64 and GameCube. Do they do GameCube now? Like those.
No.
Okay, well, maybe GameCube's going to be the next reason that you need to get the expansion pack. But I think with Pokemon, they're more interested in kind of like re-releasing those as newer games kind of thing. Yeah. Like the Capcoms of the world saying like, oh yeah, you could go and play Resident Evil, but you shouldn't because it's, like the control scheme doesn't work and we've evolved since then. So here's like a new one. And they've almost done that with like Pokemon Let's Go. Like, isn't that kind of the closest to redoing Blue and Red and all that?
That was based on like Yellow, I think. So that's true. But I mean, so they already remade Red and Blue as Red and Green on Game Boy Advance. Like that was almost 20 years ago. So yeah. They've never released that game. That would be good to see. I think they will release something at some point. I think they will drip feed it over years because I think people will play them, maybe sign up for them. Like Pokemon just has this weird love. People love to go back to the old ones. I mean, I bought them when they came out on 3DS. They were like $10 or something. Played them for 5 minutes and then thought, oh, this is too old. I'm not going to play this. But like, you think you want to play it. And that's the thing. But so, yeah, I would prefer the Game Boy Advance games over the original Game Boy ones because I played those original so much. GBA ones, there's good stuff there, and they hold up a little bit better. So, yeah, I think they would do it.
Yeah, well, time will tell, and you can tell me I was completely wrong about Pokemon, or you can tell me that you've smashed Fusion, which I would be happier to hear, to be honest, because that's a good news story. Anyway.
Well, so with all these games, my question for you is you're away next week. I'm away as well, actually, and I wasn't going to take my Switch with me because I always figure on like work trips, I don't really have time to play it. By the time you get back to the hotel, we're like, I can't be bothered. But now there's so much to play, I think that I probably will. Like, I need to take Metroid with me. Probably won't play the Game Boy games, but a couple of them are good pick up and play 10-minute type of things. I'm more interested if this is enough for you to take a Switch with you because you're normally I'm going to lug an Xbox around with me type of guy. The Switch is a much more portable system and better suited for this type of thing.
Well, I like an Xbox with me, so I can also have like Netflix and all the video apps that I can just connect to a TV wherever I am. I am going to take a Switch with me, but not for the reasons that you're getting at. But I can't tell you the reasons that I am for real. But you'll see that in a week or two, maybe. So yeah, like I will, and maybe I'll dabble in some of these. But like I don't know. There's so much forward facing stuff coming at us, or like that's just been released. Like it's just the backlog does not have space at this point.
Yeah, and I mean that Direct was looking back a lot, way more than Nintendo normally does in terms of old games coming out again. And I think that probably is our biggest sign yet that a new console is not too far away. Like it kind of feels like they're ending with Zelda as the big new thing.
Saving the good stuff.
Yeah, and it's better than their last few consoles. Like the last year of Wii U was just no releases at all. The last year of even like the GameCube, similar. It had like a year until the Wii of just nothing. Like they're holding over the good stuff. I think it makes sense. Like this is a really popular console. People will buy these old games. Like they've got Kirby coming out, which was a Wii game. They've got a Bait and Kados remasters coming out, which is GameCube again. That's why I don't think they're going to do GameCube online. Like they can remaster them and sell them to you again. What else do they have? Advance Wars obviously was Game Boy Advance. Like they're digging into their back catalog a bit more than they have done previously. So really does feel like this is the end over the next 12 months potentially. Maybe not this year, but maybe early next year is when the new console launches. And they've actually got a plan this time. The last few consoles have just kind of let it die and just pushed everything out. It kind of feels like this time they're like, let's release some of our older stuff, give it new life. People love that. They haven't done it that much. And if they actually do proper backward compatibility, it wasn't really a thing when the Switch launched in 2017. Like the PS4 and the Xbox One when they launched weren't backwards compatible at all. It was just kind of not really expected. This time it's the norm. So I feel like whatever comes next has to play all this stuff. So it's fine to re-release this stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, it definitely feels like we're moving towards the end, which is good news.
Yes, and on that note, we should move to the end. We are here in your ears next week, but not, as Ben was saying, physically here. But that's okay because there's a backlog of games and a backlog of stuff we need to talk about. So we're going to chat all things Hogwarts Legacy while we're technically away. You've had a week and a bit to play it as the reader. So have I. Ben's had maybe an extra week on top of us. So I'll be pelting you with questions. Perhaps,
we'll jump right into
potentially. Okay, well, good. Anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
That's it. I think let's leave it there, and we'll see you next week for Hogwarts Legacy.
Bye.